Okay, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to the hundreds of you who have joined us on this Tuesday afternoon for the latest in the Jewish Week series of public forums. My name is Andrew Silo Carroll, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the New York Jewish Week. Today's talk with our special guests is brought to you by the Jewish Week and the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. And for those of you who don't know, the Jewish Week and JTA are two news organizations now under the umbrella of 70 Faces Media, which also brings you My Jewish Learning, Kveller, Alma, and the Nasher. We're proud to be part of the largest and most successful Jewish media organization in America. Before I introduce my guests, I want to thank the team at 70 Faces for all their help behind the scenes. And I especially want to thank Thea Wieseltier, who's Director of Strategic Projects and Public Programs for the Jewish Week and 70 Faces. Thea is responsible for these events, and stay tuned for more great arts and culture forums in the coming months. Check your emails coming up. Now on to our program. Noa Tishby may have done more to boost the image of Israel in liberal Hollywood than any other person in the entertainment field. As an actress, producer, writer, and activist, Noa was born, raised in Tel Aviv. After a successful acting career there, she brought the Israeli TV show B'Tipul to America, where it was adapted as the hit series In Treatment by HBO. And that started a flood of American adaptations of Israeli programs. But along the way, Noa found that despite that success, Israel, the country, continued to be widely misunderstood and even demonized. She became an unofficial ambassador for Israel, and that led her to write the book we are here to discuss today, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, which is being published today, in fact, by Simon & Schuster. Joining in our conversation is one of her closest friends and himself a leading figure in bringing Israeli formats to the American screen. Jerusalem native Gideon Raff created the Israeli drama series Hatufim, or Prisoners of War, and later co-developed the American version, which we all know as Homeland. He also created the USA Network series Dig, and wrote and directed The Spy, starring Sacha Baron Cohen as the real-life Israeli spy Eli Cohen. Welcome to you both, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so
Noa,
much.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much for having us.
Pleasure.
I'll just start by saying, first of all, hi to everybody. And
Sure.
Also, this is such a moving event and such a great opportunity because Giddy is one of my favorite people in the world, and today is launch day of my book, and the fact that he's not here with me physically is so horrible. Like, we've talked about this since he found out he's going to go to Madrid to shoot his show, and I'm like, I can't believe you're not going to be on launch day. And then this came up, so this may actually ended up being me and Giddy just kind of talking amongst ourselves as if we're in the same room, and so I'm just very grateful. I'm super grateful you guys did this. And Giddy, hi.
Hi, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's out. It happened. Can you believe that? Giddy was legit one of the first people to even know that I had this idea. Like, been with me from day one. So super.
Let me start with that. Let me start. Let's tell me a little bit about your journey from an actress and producer to an activist. The book is about Israel, its history, the history of the conflict, the UN, BDS, Hamas, the Palestinian refugee issue. So what was that journey? And also, how did you go from who you were to someone who now sees I think you call it a new possibility for the future of the Middle East?
Wow, great question. And got a lot of multifaceted. So in terms of my personal trajectory, I was born and raised in Israel to a liberal family that was super Zionist with a lot of roots in the founding of Israel, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. And it was something, Zionism and Israel was something that I kind of took for granted. I was like, oh, Israel's amazing. It's super strong. It's always going to be around. There's no problem. Everybody knows that Israel's great. Everybody knows that Israel's modern. Like, living in Israel, you don't realize the perception of Israel from abroad. And then I started coming to the States and realized right from the beginning, basically, and I talk about it in the book, there's in chapter 1, right, that people have no idea really about Israel, but they have a lot of opinions. like very strong opinions and not so many facts. And I found myself kind of quote unquote falling into this role of ambassador to my friends. I would find myself sitting in rooms, drawing maps to friends in like restaurants and talking, explaining. And I found a way to explain Israel to people such that they actually understand what the story is about, why it's there, why it needs to be there, how it came to be, why it's important, why its values are aligned with US values and Western values. And I kept doing this over and over again, that it became kind of not only just second nature, but it became the most important thing in my life. It became not just kind of like a thing I do on the side, but something that became a real true purpose for me. And I always laugh that like my DNA kicked in because of my family history. I just couldn't sit by and not jump in and not try to help. So I just did.
Can you tell us, I think for people who don't know, a little bit about that family history? Because in some ways you come from Zionist royalty a little bit. I know it's complicated
right there, isn't it?
Right. So I know it's you have a complicated family tree, but just some of the main figures among your grandparents and I think even great grandparents.
Yeah.
When you tell us who they were.
So my family came. They're all Zionists. They came to build the country. They were pushed out of Europe because of racism and discrimination. They were all able to escape before the Holocaust. The rest of the family perished in the Holocaust. And so my grandmother was one of the first founders of the first kibbutz in Israel, Dgania, which is the first kibbutz in the world. My great-grandfather came to Jerusalem in 1922, and he started the Ministry of Industry and Trade and brought like a ton of industry and was really a huge advocate to like creating Jewish goods and buying Jewish goods in the Yishuv at the time. And my grandfather was Israel's first ambassador in Africa. It was the first representative that the state of Israel sent to the entire continent of Africa and really paved the way to the relationship between Israel and the emerging African nations. So it was in me the whole time. But what I didn't have was what I found that was missing. And I'm sure all of us, 538 of us, on the call, can relate to this. Like we need something to help. I needed something to help me help people understand this quickly. Help them they're like, do you have a book that I can read? And I'm like, yeah, but it's not necessarily skewing like younger. It's not necessarily skewing liberal sometimes. Like you have a lot of people in your life that need this story to be told in a way that's not only 100% factually accurate, but also relatable and fun and funny sometimes, and it was very important to me to take my history, my background, my Zionism, my family, the fun stuff, but also the heavy stuff, and kind of melt it like and weave it in with the story of Israel. So I'm telling the story of the country through the story of my family.
I'd like to bring Gideon in also. You talked a little bit about the kinds of misinformation I think you heard even among the educated people, you meet in your profession, Hollywood, entertainment. So for both of you, what is it? Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be, I don't know, this is a crazy question. What is it like to be Israeli in kind of a liberal readout like Hollywood, and how, what kind of perceptions do you think people have of you and the country?
Can I just,
Noa?
I just have to say that like really the person who really made the most incredible difference in the perception of Israel is Gideon, with the story that he tells and the content that he creates. Like you're amazing. You're a genius.
Thank you.
You are.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and good night. It was honestly, it's a good question, because I was kind of shocked when I moved to the States to see how Israel is viewed, even by Jews, by the way. Especially young Jews. And Israel is kind of one of these places that you really have to be on the ground in order to understand it. It is so complicated and so complex, but there is, and I think more and more now, and that's why this book is so important, there are these false narratives about Israel that are trying to strengthen certain agendas, and that's why we need the facts and we need the truth. And it doesn't skew you from a liberal point of view, or you can be right-wing, you can be left-wing. It's not that. It's just about the truth and the facts and being armed with the right arguments. because I've encountered many very intelligent, very political, very involved people who know very little about Israel, but talk a lot about it. It was worrisome. And, you know, we keep saying in Israel that our problem is Hasbara, you know, explaining the country. We fail in telling the story of Israel. And I think that's why this book is so important. And I loved reading it. And to be completely honest, when Noa told me about this idea that she's writing a book about Israel, I begged her not to. I said, why do you need to do this, Noa? Honestly, why do you need to throw yourself into this controversial subject? Protect yourself, don't do it. And she said, no, somebody needs to do it. Somebody needs to tell the story of Israel the way, you know, historically accurate. You know, even it's small things, you know, it could even be the fact that everybody thinks that we eat bagels in Israel. That's not true. We don't. There's a complete misconception and a complete misunderstanding of the country.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions do you think people have about Israel? And I think that's, each one is a chapter in your book, I think, Noa.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. Do we want the heavy ones or the light ones?
Take it where you will.
What's that?
Take it where you will. Just what comes up again and again?
Well, the first thing that came up for me was I actually talk about it in chapter 1 of the book. So it's when I started coming to the US and I was here for a couple of months and we're hanging out with a group of like these young up and coming actors, producers or whatever. And this girl came up to me who was very successful at the time and ended up being a whole lot more successful. Giddy knows who she is, but I don't tell. And I know, right? Shh. And she was like, oh, I heard you're from Israel. And I'm like, yeah. And she goes, so how does your family feel about you? And I didn't understand what she was. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she goes, you know, that you're modern and everything, you know, that you don't wear all the head covers. And I was shocked. I was completely shocked. And this was a couple of months after I moved here. And I didn't take this to think that there's something wrong with her at all. She was an educated person and successful already back then. And I'm like, oh my God, if a person like this thinks about Israel that way, then what is the rest of the world thinking about us? And that was when I realized that there's a real problem. But what had happened in the past, I would say 10 to 15 years, is that it shifted from this like kind of cute little Hasbara problem of like, you know, oh, you guys didn't know we're modern. You guys didn't know we're, you know, Israel's like more liberal and like open and, you know, a flourishing democracy and all that. And it turned into an existential threat because right now the narrative that is being pushed from the UN to BDS to progressive circles to a lot of misinformed or intentionally misinformed groups, right? The narrative of Israel being an apartheid state, which is so fake that it's like borderline slander, like colonialist state, oppressor, like all these narratives are designed to have the country implode. And this is becoming, this is one of the reasons in the past, let's say 10 years that it became very clear to me that I need to do something about it because I am a liberal. I mean, I'm a registered independent, right? But I'm in my views, I'm a liberal. I'm a woman. This is the first history book about Israel that's ever been written by a woman. Shocking piece of information that I didn't realize was true, but nonetheless, excluding Golda Meir's biography and Anita Shapiro's, an Israeli historian who wrote amazing books and got translated into English. So I'm a woman. I'm 100% Israeli and 100% American. And I come from the liberal point of view, and the thesis of the book is that if you are a person that likes democracy, freedom of speech, human rights, women's rights, LGBTQ plus, like any kind of right, you need to support Israel within the context of the Middle East. And you have to have your facts straight and not get swayed by nefarious forces that have an actual agenda to make Israel not exist anymore. So we have to expose it. We have to be powerful about this. We have to do it with like what I call the cunning use of facts, right? And I just couldn't sit still. I couldn't stand by. And I know that I have, hopefully, you know, a way to communicate this to a larger audience in a way that isn't threatening or that isn't that doesn't sound like a propaganda, like that, and it comes from a woman. And I'm like, you know, maybe we can listen better this way.
And I think it's also very important to make the distinction that when you read the book, you realize Noah is critical of Israel, and it's okay to be critical of Israel. It's okay to say what's wrong with what's happening, and the history is not always beautiful. Israel is not always in the right, but
Yeah.
you need to know the facts in order
Yeah.
to build the argument. And the lies are really just making the discussion impossible.
Yeah, that's very true. The thing is this, right? No country is perfect. There's just no such thing, right? Not a single country in the world was created with like a kumbaya. It's just no country is perfect. But the disproportionate obsession that people have about Israel, and when you start breaking it down to numbers, it's insane. Like the United Nations Security Council resolution, there are more Security Council resolutions against Israel than like Syria, Iran, Iraq, China, and North Korea combined. I mean, what's with the obsession? It's crazy, and you have to judge Israel by the same parameters that you would judge any other country, and it's not by a long shot. You can't sit at your cozy, comfy couch in a dorm room somewhere in college and spew hate on your keyboard because you don't have a Sharia law, a Sharia state trying to get created 30 miles from your house. And how many missiles would it take for you to actually respond? Like, what's a disproportionate response to? How many missiles? I don't know. How many missiles would the U.S. tolerate before it would wipe any other country if citizens would get hurt? And that's what Israel is dealing with. So yes, it's important to criticize Israel. And the beautiful thing about it, it's a single consistent democracy in the Middle East. Israel actually welcomes criticism. The reason there's so much criticism about Israel is because it opens up to UN Right Watch and to the UN inspections, and it's kind of like we are judging ourselves and we're putting soldiers on trial when they need to. Like, it's actually a functioning democracy. I mean, it's so democratic it's almost ungovernable with what's happening right now with the elections, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, that's and it needs to be spoken up and it needs to be weighed in. All of it needs to be weighed in, and I just wanted to write this book because I knew it was missing, and I was hoping that I can be helpful for our community. Just so people are interested.
You mentioned audience before. I'm curious, who do you see as the ideal audience for the book? And I wanted to ask both of you as professional communicators. Is this book, can it be effective in changing minds? Is it just going to be for the person who may be marginally interested, but we'll keep them from succumbing to propaganda? I mean, who is your ideal reader?
I would have loved for this. One of the things that I heard, I wrote this with I would say 18 to 34 in mind. So if you are an 18 to 34, if you know an 18 to 34, that's the book for them. I've found out that it's actually probably a wider net because like older people and younger people read this and were like, oh my God, this is great. But in my dreams, this would be a book that every person before they go into college would get. So they'd be armed with the facts when they get approached by BDS and they tell them all that bull crap, pardon my French, they know what to say. Because so many of my friends were like, I just don't know what to say. I get stuck in conversations. People ask me tough questions. I get hate on social media and I just don't know what to say. So this is the book that can help you know what to say.
I think one of the problems today is that there is no discussion anymore. There are sides, there are camps. It's so divisive right now. And what Noa did with this book, which I loved, is tell the story of her family. And she made it so personal that you're reading this book and you're learning about the country, but also in a very, very personable, funny, way. It's not, this kind of Israel is this, Israel is that. It's actually the story of her grandmother and the story of her mother's first husband and how Noah dealt with his death. And Memorial Day comes through that in Israel and what it means in Israel. So it's a very personal book that I think everybody can find something to latch onto in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of those personal stories, I'd say are very powerful. I think you write about your sister's boyfriend at one point, who I think was killed in the
Lebanon, 1980.
The Lebanon. So yeah, and I know that was, and obviously I guess you were a child at that point, yes?
Yeah. And it's one of those things that it's in every Israeli experience. the brush against death. And I was sharing from my perspective how it kind of changed me as a person on a real visceral psychological level that took me years to decipher. You know, it's kind of like you live in a certain place and you live through and you become very strong and very, you know, kind of like, I'm fine, I'm tough, you know, tougher upper lip, let's just get on with it. And then later on, when you do the work that you got to do on yourself, and I was like, why am I like this? Like, why do I fall into like, I'm fine. Like people would ask me like, how you doing? I'd be like, I'm totally good. I'm great. No problem. Right. When I was clearly not. But I didn't know how to access that. I didn't know how to share that, how to be vulnerable, how to talk about how I feel when I feel it, and tracing back to the traumas that my family went through and how I reacted to it and what was my kind of like immediate decision. Like, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be strong. Great. Can't let that affect me. Go, is something that made me think like, how is this affecting nations? Because everybody has the variation of a trauma. We really need to be kind of present to it and willing to be open about it for ourselves and for other. And, you know, hopefully that can bring about a change, definitely personal, but hopefully on a societal and a nation level.
Right, right. I'd like to ask you both how you think, I wasn't kidding before when I said, you know, your impact on kind of the Israel conversation, because for all the, whatever's happening on college campuses, to tune in, you know, Netflix offers you a menu of Israeli or Israeli inspired programs. How do you think the shows that you've been a part of and have brought to the States have shaped how people have viewed Israel, and have they changed minds? Have they opened people's eyes to the diversity and the variety of the Israeli experience? And that's for both of you.
Giddy, I think you could. Do you want to take that first? Because yours is definitely much more.
Well, I'll start by saying that when Noa brought B'tipul and treatment to Hollywood, it's really what opened the door for so many creators, so many shows, so many formats to cross into America and to show Israel through the eyes of Israeli creators. And it's enough to put a camera somewhere in Israel to tell an Israeli story, and you immediately see a world that maybe you thought of differently. So I think just the fact that you now have on Netflix, on Apple, on all these shows, you have on all these platforms, you have Israeli shows that show you what it is to live in Israel, what dilemmas we're dealing with, the complex society we live in, the fact that it's not white and black, the fact that it's a mixture of so many cultures and so many tribes and so many groups living together in this a little piece of land. You get this just from watching the shows. So even without dealing with what the shows are really about, you understand Israel in a better way, just like I understand, Mexico, Colombia, Spain in a better way when I see those shows on Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is. Apple. I have an Apple, so I'm saying Apple. So I think that's really important. I think especially in a time now when everybody has an opinion and facts are so quickly overlooked and fake news is bought and eaten by everybody. It's important to just see what the world looks like really, and to see the other, who you think is your enemy, who you think is somebody you don't actually empathize with. You do when you see these shows. And I think that's opening your mind, that's opening your hearts, and that's our job as artists, is to build these bridges between societies and between countries.
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, Giddy, literally, you tell stories of incredible heroic Israeli stories. Like The Spy about Eli Cohen, and the Red Sea Diving Resort about this crazy Mossad story. They're both on Netflix. You should watch them. They're amazing if you haven't. Like, you literally tell the story of Israel and Israeli people, and just amazing amazing stories that people maybe didn't know about. For me, within treatment, and actually pretty much everything I sold, none of it was actually Israel centric in content. But what it did do in terms of transforming people's hearts and minds was it changed the Hollywood community's perception of Israel, like 180. So when I brought over in treatment, when I started coming to LA, Hollywood, even though a lot of people are Jews, they were like, yeah, Israel, whatever, we don't care. Like, or I went there when I was bar mitzvah or whatever. And then when I had the idea to bring in treatment over, which was not done before at all, I was thinking, oh, hang on a minute, it's a format, like a format from England. We can sell it, I can sell it here. It's an amazing show. All we need to do is translate it. But Hollywood was not prepared for this. So my first few phone calls were like, hi, listen, so I have a format from Israel, and the reply was like, good for you. Okay, what, and I literally had to explain to people what it is that I'm trying to do. And I'm talking even about my legal team and my agents. They had, my lawyer who's amazing. He's like, okay. And, I had to explain to them my intention. And then going to all these like Hollywood executives that were at first not, they just weren't, it wasn't on their radar. Israeli content was not on their radar. But once they watched the show, where the show got picked up, got produced, and the success that it had, it changed. Like Hollywood became from like, nah, Israel, we don't care, to like literally you'd call person and be like, I have a format from Israel. And it's like, yes, when can we take a meeting? So that I saw in a huge way, because I think the public wouldn't necessarily know that In Treatment was an Israeli show, right? To them, it's like an American show, but the industry does. And it made a huge difference, and it brought so much money into the Israeli entertainment industry and so many productions. And it really transformed created an entire market. So Giddy is the one who's changing hearts and minds with content. And I actually was able to kind of change the gatekeepers to have them be more open to the thought.
Right. In the book, you talk about Startup Nation and some of the reasons why Israel certainly has become a dominant force in the tech world. Let me ask the same question about entertainment. Why in a country as small as Israel are we seeing so many shows that have international appeal? Tell me, maybe you can both tell us about the creative community that kind of feeds on each other, and what's the ethos that makes them, so disproportionately influential.
Yes, so disproportionately. I guess that we're disproportionately fascinating, but also disproportionately successful in like the entertainment industry. So, hey, so Giddy, tell me, I'm going to say, what I usually say, and then tell me what you think and add on to it. So I think it stems from two particular, two topics. One of them is necessity is the mother of all inventions. And the other one is opinionated audience. So in Israel, you got 9 million people. Some of them are Haredi, some of them are Arab, some of them is like not all of them are your target market. So you don't have a lot of buyers, you don't have a lot of ads, you don't have a lot of ads, you don't have a lot of money. You cannot produce expensive shows, so you can't rely on choppers and explosions and whatever. On the other flip side of it, you have a highly opinionated bunch of viewers who will tell you exactly what they think and will turn off the TV. So it literally the core of the content from Israel on the page needs to be brilliant, or else it's just not going to get produced. And if it does, it's not going to get viewed. So that's just like the bar is way higher in terms of actual storytelling. Yid, what do you think?
Absolutely, and I'll add to that. Israel is a very small market and a tiny industry. But we are an open society. So on any given day, an Israeli creator has to fight with Mad Men and Breaking Bad. And, we have all these channels. We see content from all over the world. So if I need to convince the Israeli audience to watch Chatufim instead of Game of Thrones on a certain night, that's show that I'm making for a fraction of the money that they have. Has to, I think, touch us in a different way. The Israeli creators, because of that, they're very open to seeing other content, and they know what's out there, and our sensibilities, as I think Israelis are storytellers. That's, I think, also the success of the high-tech industry. We're storytellers. So I think because of that, the stories either have they're very brave. Like Betipul, if you think about it, they played with the format of what a television show is. You can watch it only on Wednesdays, or you can watch it every day and see all the stories, or you can, just two people sitting in a room and it was fascinating. You're at the edge of your seat. You're watching shows like Shtisel right now that give you a glimpse into the Orthodox world in a way that you haven't, gotten the opportunity to see before. And Israel, because it's such a small market and the stakes, none of us become very rich working in the industry in Israel. You have more freedom to be brave in how you tell a story. Mm. And I think that makes for some really interesting stories.
Oh, that's great.
And also, by the way, the stakes in Israel are always very high. It's life and death.
Right.
Yep.
I want to get back a little bit to the conflict for a second. How's that sound? No, I'm going to just, something you write in the book is that the majority of Israeli and Palestinian voices, those who want to find a way to live side by side in prosperity, are getting drowned out by loud nationalist, radical, or religious voices on both sides. Mm-hmm. So I want to take this in a little different direction and ask, do either of you have friends or partners on the Palestinian side? And I'm thinking of folks with whom you can have a constructive dialogue, or maybe write a book, or create a series that points to a more hopeful future. So I'll throw it open to the both of you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's true. I think we're experiencing this all over the world. This is not something that's unique in Israel. This is happening, just look around everywhere. The divide, the tail wagging the dog, the base making politicians go crazy, gaslighting the media, the whole thing is something that we're experiencing everywhere. The thing is that Israel is much smaller, so stakes are higher and everything is faster and has bigger impact on like real life issues. One of my best friends in the world is Musab Hassan Youssef, who was born in Ramallah, was a Palestinian. He wrote a blurb, an endorsement for my book. You may know him as the Green Prince. He's one of the most inspiring people I have ever met in my life. He is a yogi and an amazing vegan chef, and would come to my house and cook incredible meals. And it's extremely important for us to have this dialogue. He's a very unique character. So, there's no doubt that he's not your usual guy, obviously, but actually I highlight in my book a lot of people who have made this their life's work. One of them is Rabbi Fruman from the Tekoa settlements. He's one of the most incredible people I've ever read about. He is obviously a settler and a rabbi. He's the head rabbi of Tekoa, and also a huge peace activist, and like an advocate for collaboration, cooperation, coexistence, love, friendship. He passed away a few years ago. He was like a fierce peace advocate, and he was carried to his final resting place by Arabs and Jews and left wings and Palestinians from the local village. And I think highlighting people like that and showing that reality on the ground is not as grim as the media would show is super crucial, and finding these inspiring stories that affected so many people but need to have a louder kind of voice and being communicated abroad, communicated in America and the rest of the world, hopefully.
I love what you just said. And also to answer your question, from the beginning of my career, from the very first project, I always collaborated with Arab and Palestinian creators and actors. I think I grew up in Jerusalem. So our lives are together. And it's very true to say that the governments are the problem, not the people. In every one of my shows, I made it very, very important to me to collaborate and hear the other side and work with the other side and realize that it's not another side. We're all in the same side.
Yeah, we are.
Wanting a better tomorrow, wanting a peaceful future.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, it's the fringes on the right and on the left are the ones that are making the noise and making the drama. And the fringes on the Palestinian side are the ones that are causing like terrorist attack that freak everybody else out. The fringes on the sides may have strong positions. The majority of everybody is still in the center. It can be center left or center right. And the majority, what I say in the book is that the majority of Israelis are kind of, and Giddy, correct me if I'm wrong, right? They're kind of like in the, just give us a good deal and let's talk. Like super open to it. So it's about like calming down both fringes on both sides, actually, by the way, in America as well, and coming to an actual, like sitting down and finding a solution. It's not going to be easy, but it's definitely doable.
You talk about this, at one point you write that the two-state solution is the only solution we can think of today that will create stability in the region. But you also note that a new and inventive leadership needs to emerge. I
Yeah.
think there you were talking about the Palestinian side, but what about the Israeli side?
I wasn't saying the Palestinian side. I said new and inventive leadership.
So good. So tell us, tell reader, some of our viewers who saw the Israeli elections, you mentioned them before, it doesn't appear that the leadership on the Israeli side is much interested in changing the status quo. So what do you see on the other side? What should Israel do while we're waiting for a new Palestinian leadership to emerge?
Again, I think a stalemate is present in Israel and around the world. I think that the good thing about the Israeli election is what I say a lot, Israel being the single consistent democracy in the Middle East. I always joke that it's so democratic, it's almost ungovernable, right? But the thing is this, I made sure throughout my entire career to never endorse a politician in Israel, to never tell people who I vote for, who I support and who I don't. So I just want to make sure that for, especially the Israeli people, that it's clear that I'm a Zionist, I'm pro-peace, but I don't take a position, even though I've been asked to kind of help out. I have friends on the right and friends on the left. I talk in my book about being friends with Ayelet Shaked from Yamina, but also with Yair Lapid from Yesh Atid. I make sure to talk to everybody all the time. The one thing I will say is that term limit is probably something that Israel should adopt very quickly, because I think nobody is happy with what's happening right now. And it's going to be a challenge for Bibi Netanyahu to create a coalition that would actually hold. And I think, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think the main thing is to kind of like, all right, a new leadership is needed all around. It really is.
So I should mention at this point that if any of our viewers want to ask questions, in a few minutes, we'll open it up for Q&A. You can just drop them into the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. And you'll have to let me pick a little bit, but that's the moderator's prerogative. I want to ask, and I think this is obvious. I'm assuming we have a very American audience here. So if American friends ask for advice, liberals, conservatives, but let's say liberals who want to see autonomy or independence for the Palestinians and security for Israel, what do you tell them? How can they constructively advocate for a two-state solution, for Israeli security, for Palestinian rights? What role can an American Jewish audience play in what's happening in your countries?
I would not answer the question with what I think they should do politically, because I'm just a TV creator and I don't have those kind of thoughts about myself. But I would say that starting by getting informed is the way to do it, and reading a book like Noah wrote is the way to start getting informed and to get the facts at least. Whether, by the way, you believe that Israel should be a one state or two state or whatever it is, be armed with the facts. Be armed with the real historical facts of what this country is. And then I think the other thing is, it seems like when we were growing up, there was much more talking between the sides. There was much more dialogue. And I think we've stopped doing that. There are still organizations that try to get, Palestinians and Israelis together to talk. And I think dialogue is a must. That's the way to move forward, by talking, by building bridges, by helping each other, by understanding each other, by understanding that we all love our kids the same way, and we all want a better future, and we all just want to get food on the table. And it seems like in recent years there has been such divisiveness also in Israeli society itself, but we need to get back to talking, and a great way to do that is to know the facts and start talking.
Couldn't agree more. Which, by the way, is just another reason I'm annoyed by BDS movement, which we can talk about in length shortly. BDS, which is advocating for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is literally trying to stop all communication, all collaboration, financial, cultural, academia, between Israel and anybody, including the Palestinians, which is obviously, first of all, hurting the Palestinians. And second, how is this helping peace in any way? Like I say in my book, an enemy you get to know you cannot be an enemy for much longer. And that's the bottom line. Like, there needs to be more collaboration, more cooperation, more conversation. I give examples like this, like the town of Rawabi, which is a new town in Ramallah, like near Ramallah, which is a town where like startup companies are sourcing coders, like Palestinian coders, and like JVP, I think that's the name of the fund, is investing in it. And like there's collaboration between companies, jobs, people just kind of like, all right, how can we work together? That's the future. Because right now what's happening in Israel, and I'm sure it's happening on the Palestinian side as well, is there are Israeli kids who never met a Palestinian. I don't know if my nieces and nephews have met a Palestinian. And that's a problem. We didn't grow up like that. We grew up more kind of, traveling and Giddy, definitely you in Jerusalem, but also me. Like, we had friends, we'd go to like eat lebanese together. Like, it was more, my nephew never met a Palestinian. So all he knows is some version of a terrorist, because that's the experience that they did have. So that is something I think that I know there are a lot of people within Israel who are trying to do this. Unfortunately, there's a stalemate, a political stalemate with, and also COVID, obviously, which pushed that whole topic down to like, number 6, 7, or 700. I don't even know. And kind of rightfully so. Obviously, we all need to save ourselves from this pandemic and get life back on track first. But for the new day that is going to come upon us, God willing, with like vaccines and enough time, it's something that we need to think about, definitely.
Great. So I'm going to turn to some audience questions, although I do also, Gideon, if you have any questions for Noa, feel free. I know.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good, how are you?
Good. You wrote a book.
I did.
I'm so excited.
Thank you. And it's coming out.
And it's, by the way, I saw today it's on the bestseller list in your category in Amazon.
Number one.
Number one.
Before you're published, that's not fair.
It happened yesterday. I don't know, but whatever you guys were doing, keep doing that. I have no idea. I was surprised.
I also want to say, someone asked, is it available in Kindle? It is available as a
audiobook, which I recorded.
Oh, you did? Okay, that's good.
I'm narrating the book. It was such hard work, you guys. You have no idea. It's so fun to listen to now. But my God, I couldn't believe it's like 40 hours of me. They set up a studio in my closet because of COVID. So I'm sitting in the closet for 40 hours and record. It was a lot, but it's really fun. And the music at the beginning of the audiobook, it's Infected Mushroom.
Oh yeah?
I make sure to work only with Israelis across creative. So like my book designer is Israeli, the photographer and the whole glam team are Israelis. I'm wearing Israeli designers, and now the music is done by an Israeli band as well.
So can I warn readers that it can be a little cursy, so that 18 to 34 is probably a good warning.
I love it. So that means that they're reading it. So yeah. I dropped about 4 to 5 F-bombs there.
Okay.
Ethan Bonner.
When you read the book, it's very conversational, and it's like you really have the sense that you're sitting over dinner with Noa and talking to her about.
Ethan Bronner actually said it so nicely. He read it and loved. He's amazing. He's a great supporter, and he said you use it strategically to kind of wake up the audience, just in case, to make sure that they didn't fall asleep. So I did. I did throw it in there. I think it's maybe 3 to 5 times. But here's the thing: if we want to talk to a new audience, we have to actually talk to a new audience and talk in a different way. I mean, I doubt that there's an 18-year-old or even a 15-year-old that never heard this word before. So yeah, it's it's not an accuracy. It's just when I get really pissed off, I drop a little.
Gotcha.
A little bit.
One
But if you
question-
want to read, if you want to buy it to your kids or your grandkids, rest assured they're going to be more relating to that book than to anything else that doesn't have the F-bomb in it.
Right, that's true. A couple of people want to know what upcoming shows or projects you're working on both of you or either one of you, and what can we look forward to?
Oh, that would be giddy because all I'm working on is the book. Giddy. I'm like book.
I'm working on it so hard. I'm shooting a new show for Apple here in Madrid. I'm in Madrid. And working on a few other projects. I've learned in my career never to talk about a show before it actually is in the can, as we say, because things happen so quickly in this industry. And so I can't tease too much. I'm also writing an Israeli show that I'm excited about. I'm writing a few things and hopefully soon I can announce them.
Great. Someone wants to know, it's a question I think I asked, but from another direction, which is what can you recommend to keep for someone who wants to be an ally of Palestine while embracing Judaism in Israel? Does that make sense? Right? How to be an ally of the Palestinians?
First of all, to not think that those things are mutually exclusive. They're not.
Exactly.
They are not.
Exactly.
I want a better future for Palestine and for Palestinians, and so does Noah, and so should everybody. That's an Israeli interest. It is. It's in our interest. So I think that's the thing. I think it's to not see this as a mutually exclusive thing. You can be pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian at the same time. You should be.
Yeah. In fact, this is the rational conclusion. Now, here's what I would recommend. Because people tend to think I'm either pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, you think that in order to be an ally to Palestine, you need to give crap to Israel. And you need to, I'm going to condemn Israel because I'm pro-Palestine. That strategy doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because I think that as humans, Jews, Israeli, Palestinians, whatever, we need to start, and I'm saying this with all the love and respect, holding Palestinians accountable too. So nothing is a replacement to a united Palestinian front, to a powerful, authentic leadership, to a voice that is deciding. The Palestinian as a national movement need to start getting clear for themselves on what it is that they want. Because if they want the entire state of Israel, like you can have some Jews would have loved to have two banks of the Jordan River, but like nobody's advocating for this anymore, right? So if the Palestinian as a national movement is after the entire state of Israel, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, as BDS is chanting, literally verbatim, that's what they're after, then we're gonna have a problem. But if they want a state, like the Jews were like, all right, give us a state, doesn't have to be the entire state, just give us a state. Then we can start talking about it. So I think holding the Palestinian leadership and Palestinian people accountable, advocating for more financial support for Palestinians. If people want to start businesses in the West Bank for to help Palestinian authority, to help Palestinian people get like jobs, get their lives better, those are the things that can actually empower the Palestinians and aren't about bashing Israel. Because I think that's one of the problems that we have. We're like, oh my God, I really want to stand for Palestinians. I'm going to give Israel crap again. That's not helping at all. Empower them, strengthen them, investments, opportunities, jobs, and leadership. They need to have a leadership. I mean, Mahmoud Abbas, with all due respect, and there's, he's moderate and that's fantastic, but he's completing his 16th year of a 4-year term.
Mm-hmm. Also, by the way, just to add to that from the entertainment side, you see more and more Palestinian content coming out, both
Yes.
from Gaza and from the West Bank, and it's fantastic to see. And Israel is, by the way, supporting some of these movies and some of this content, which is also great to see, and that has to continue. We have to give voice to the people on the other side of the wall if we ever want to understand them and we ever want to have a future with them.
Yeah. I mean, and listen, and like empower moderates within the Palestinian leadership and within Palestinian people. Shine a light on people like Bashar al-Masri, who created, built, funded Rawabi. Just like show those people, strengthen and support those people. Enough saying like, Israel is not great what you're doing. No, we know it's fine. Okay, enough. The whole world is coming out against us. Let's, empower to just make sure that we need an opposing force to negotiate with, to communicate with. That's what needs to be done, in my opinion.
There's a really interesting question here, and it reminded me of something in your book. I think there was a statistic in your book about how many young people think Israel is basically a religious state, sort of like a Jewish Iran. So here's the question here. I'll give it to, this is someone who acknowledges that they don't know much about Israel, but that given the nature that it's a Jewish country, how does it live in harmony with LGBT rights and other modern ideologies? So I think that's the question. I think this is interesting that people still perceive Israel as kind of dominated by Haredim. So tell us what it's like, what the secular culture in Israel is really like.
Well, I'd love for Gidi to answer that as well. First of all, only 14% of Israeli population are Haredi. Israel couldn't—
Haredi, you could say, are the black hat, shtisel, most orthodox of the Jews in Israel.
Yes, the shtisels of the world.
Yeah.
So Israel is, when I moved to the States, I was shocked by how Puritan the United States was in compared to Israel. Like, I was shocked that I can't drop the F-bomb on TV. Like, we can say the equivalent of the F-bomb on TV in Israel everywhere, which you can't say here. And it never had like some of the discriminatory laws that they have here. For example, don't ask, don't tell. Like, that never existed in the Israeli military. If you're an LGBTQ plus member, you know what gay pride in Tel Aviv is all about. You wanted to go there, or you went there, you had friends who went there. Gay people in Israel have pretty much the same rights, I think, excluding surrogacy for now, Gidi. But under the law, they have exact same rights as married people. So Israel was created as a culturally Jewish yet secular state. And it is true to this day as well, despite all the fractions within it and various religious kind of interpretation of Judaism that exists within the country. Super liberal, super open. And also, Israel is the only country in the Middle East in which you can make out with your same-sex partner on the beach at 2 p.m. and nothing would happen. People won't even like stop next to you, whereas you would get arrested and possibly stoned everywhere to death, everywhere else in the region. So it's the only country in the region in which you can just make out with like your same sex partner and nothing would happen, that is.
Great. Someone's asking about the internal divisions in Israel. You don't deal with them too much in your book, but they're there. You talk a little bit about it. For example, the division between the left and the right. What's being done, or what can you add to the dialogue so that Israelis themselves aren't at each other's throats?
Well, I think there's a chapter called "May the Melting Pot Not Melt Us All," and it's an entire chapter that talks about the internal divide in Israel from an Israeli's point of view. So this is something that I think I've never seen communicated that way into America. I think, much like the rest of the world today, it's not so much a divide about left and right, especially in the last year with everything that's been going on. It's more of a intersectionality and identity and history and background. And there are a lot of different fractions in Israel that are, for the most part, melted really well, but some of them are still problematic and are carried on through 1, 2, 3 generations. I definitely discussed that in the book. And I had a bunch of people who told me that I did a good job in trying to explain, especially like the Sheda Adati, like the sectarian demon, quote unquote, which is still present in voting patterns and still present in gaslit by politicians. It's being used. But not so much when you look at like the culture and everything that's happening right now and like the new generation.
I'm not sure what that is. That's where
the background of where did the Jews that came over to Israel from all over, from Eastern Europe, from North Africa, there was there was a discrimination that occurred back then, but it wasn't just against, it was just discrimination all around. Everybody was thrown into like ma'abarot, these refugee camps. The state had tripled its population within less than a decade, doubled within 2 years. Like they were swamped with refugees, and they kind of had to, catch up and do everything while the state was being created. And they did the best they could. But they tried to do a melting pot in their own image in a way, and they did not give a lot of attention or respect to other cultures. And they tried to kind of push them away, and it created a lot of anger and a lot of resentment that is rightful, and that is now taken over in a beautiful way. And like the music, the food, the whole thing. But it's still being used by certain politicians to be like, oh, we have always been discriminated against. And I'm like, you've never been discriminated against. You personally, never been discriminated against. So like, stop gaslighting it. But they do it. But I'm actually hopeful about that. There's a whole new breed of Israelis that is just like, I don't care about that anymore. But I had to give that background for people to understand where that's coming from. So it's not so much left and right, like it isn't here, right, in a way. But it's more about your background, your history, and whether or not it affected your family and how.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Someone's asking, I'll combine that with something I want to ask and something someone else wants to ask. They would say, what would you say, what's your argument to the radical settlers who want the whole West Bank for the Jews, right? And I would ask it, I would add to that, in promoting the book, do you have a plan for engaging with the other side, however you define that, debating a settler who might not appreciate your support of the things you say about Palestinians, or debating a far left American college student who does support BDS and does support some of the UN resolutions you talked about?
Well, first of all, to the American college student, whether they're Jewish or not, if they say they support BDS, I would just ask them, do you support the dismantling of the state of Israel? Because the problem is that BDS is hiding their actual agenda and intention. The thing is that a lot of the supporters of BDS, especially the Jewish community, they think that BDS is about the West Bank. They think that BDS is about an Israeli government, this or another, or policies. BDS is not about that. BDS does not want Israel to exist, period, end of story. And my gut feeling is that a lot of people who support BDS don't know that. They just don't. They're like, no, it's about Israeli policies in the West Bank. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Because if it was about Israeli supporting Israeli policies in the West Bank, they would have got a lot more Israelis or Jews supporting them, but they're not. So that's what I would say to that person. And look, it's the region is, the Middle East is floating on the undercurrent of religion, right? If I have a ultra-Orthodox settler who's arguing that if we give up an inch of land, we'll die, and if I have a Muslim, a radical Muslim that says if we give an inch of land, we'll die, and death to all the infidels, it's hard to argue that kind of an extreme. Like it's just hard, and I can respect that. I look at that. I mean, I don't respect anybody who tries to kill me, but I understand that that's what they think. That's not who we're trying to affect. And the thing is this, right? There are about 400,000
people are.
What's that?
That's also not who most people are.
Exactly what I was about to say. There are about 490,000 settlers, 2.9 million Palestinians living in the West Bank. Out of the settlers, the divide is about a third of them are the ultra nationalists, the ones that are like diehards, it's not a lot of people. So it's, again, the tail wagging the dog. That's not the majority of Israelis, and it's not even the majority of settlers. So yeah, there are people who are on the fringe and are extreme in their position. And I just think that Judaism is about what's in your heart, not necessarily about a place or it is about the land of Israel, but like when the Jews walked through the desert, they said, build us a temple. The Jews were telling God, we want to build you a house. And God was like, I don't need that. And he was like, no, we want to build you a house. And he said, well, okay, fine. And then he said, Tivnu li mishkan ve'eshkon b'tochachem, which is, okay, fine, build me a house, but I will live within you. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things about Judaism. It's in our heart. So what are we doing fighting over, like we can figure out a solution for it. And there are a lot of smarter, more spiritual people than me to actually have paved a way, like Rabbi Foreman, for example.
Someone's asking you to say something nice about Netanyahu.
Oh, I could say a lot of nice things about Netanyahu. Listen, I don't believe in extremes. My political views, they change based on values and particular topics. Like I don't define myself right or left by any stretch of the imagination. Look, Netanyahu, first of all, he's one of the best orators in the history of the world, probably the best politician out there in the world right now. And also, the Abraham Accord is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. Like, this is a huge breakthrough in the Middle East. It's the first time that the nations in the region are acknowledging publicly what everybody in the region knows, but have not acknowledged publicly up until now, is that Israel's not the biggest problem in the Middle East, like Iran is. So going public like this with like like going official on Facebook, like we're in a relationship, it's a huge thing. Because there's been a relationship with Israel and the Gulf states for a while, but this is the first time it's going public. It's absolutely extraordinary, and Netanyahu is credited with this, as is the Trump administration. So, there you go, easy.
So I'm gonna take again my prerogative. I'm gonna ask a last question, I think, and that is, can you both of you? I'll start with Gideon. Can you recommend something for American audiences that we should be reading or watching? It could be about Israel. It could be about just something that you're really enamored with right now. Just you're in the industry. What should we be watching that we may not be aware of?
There's this great book that just came out today, written by Noa Tishby, that I think everybody should go and buy and read. It's not trying to convince you to think any different than what you think, but just to give you some context and some facts, and a really good read. Yeah.
And a fun read.
A fun read, yeah.
Fun.
That's what I recommend.
Okay, great. And Noah, you get the last word, of course.
The last word, which word is it?
Recommend your own book, which, by the way, if you go to our group chat, I'm not sure you'll see that. The Amazon link is there. And if not, you can find it on Amazon. And again, what's the name of that book?
What's the name of the book? It's called Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth.
Terrific. Well, I want to thank you, Noa Tishby, and you, Gideon Raff, both for your insights and for the time you were generous enough to give us. I want to urge our audience, yes, to go out and buy the book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth.
Oh, great.
That is out today, wherever you buy books. And we hope to see you at the next Jewish Week Public. You'll be getting a notice when that's coming up. And really, for everyone, have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much.